welcome to another episode of Too Twisted for TV. Doing something a little bit different. Solo, too, this time. And I'm here in the Weather Center, too. I want to show you the models, and I do this on Facebook quite a bit where I'll go through some of the modeling data, but I thought, you know what, another good platform for this would be on our live streaming app and on Too Twisted for TV. And what I want to focus in on today is about the winter outlook. It's what everybody wants to know right now. Plus data that I have been looking at, when does the first real cold snap get here? And I'm going to talk about that too for this up and coming weekend, the beginning of next week. But there's something else that has caught my attention that I want to go over, and that's what's the models and specifically the European weeklies that I look at that go out in much longer range. What they have been very insistent on, I'd say a few days after Thanksgiving, towards the last couple of days of November and the first week of December, for a significant cold snap. And when I say that, I'm talking about persistent and strong ridging, and I'll show this to you here with the data here just a little bit, but persistent and strong ridging up into Alaska. That's what I always look at to see if we get cold coming down here. Now, you can get that in cold come and goes, and that's what's going to happen this upcoming weekend. The cold's going to come in Sunday. It's going to be very quick, hard-hitting burst of very cold air. And then we're going to talk more about that winter outlook. Let's go through it all. First thing I want to start off with, and I want to make sure everybody has clarification, because you see these all over the internet, all over these winter outlooks produced by NOAA, and you have to take these and put these in some sort of perspective and context. So this is the temperature outlook from NOAA for the winter months. Remember, the winter months are December, January, and February. That's meteorological winter. This is a weak La Nina that we're in, okay? So this is basically a textbook outlook for a weak to moderate La Nina, what you're looking at right here. And it doesn't tell us a whole lot, but this is guidance. It's not a forecast, it's guidance. And what it's telling us is that across the northern tier of the country, in those blues, the confidence, there's a higher than normal confidence that the temperatures there will end up being below average. And then you see a large area where it's near average or near normal. And then you see the southern tier of the United States with above average temperatures. So put this into some context first in a couple of different ways. The first thing, if the temperature in Billings, Montana is 0.1 degree below average, in other words, very close to average, but 0.1 degree below average, that verifies. If the temperature over that 3-month period in Atlanta, hypothetically, is 0.1 degree above average, that verifies. Please keep that in mind. It doesn't mean where you see those oranges that it's going to be a warm winter. That's not what that means. All that is telling you is that there's a higher than normal confidence that when you look at the 3-month period of time, the temperatures are going to be above average. That's over 3 months. There's a lot that happens in the weather in 3 months. What if you have a warm December where the temperatures are 5 degrees above average, but in the last few days of December, you get a big cold snap and big snow? But the month as a whole is above average, but that month will be known in perspective as a very snowy month because of what happened at the end of December. We've seen this time and time again here in Arkansas. So this is a classic La Nina outlook that you see here, and I urge you to take it with a grain of salt. We'll get to more of this in just a little bit. And the same can be said for the precipitation outlook. And so this is telling us in those months, December, January, and February, that the odds are tilting towards average or slightly above average rainfall. You could go a whole month without any rain. You could have one of the driest months of the entire year with this. And then the other 2 months are so rainy that it makes up for it. So remember, it's over a 3-month period of time. But where you see strong correlations with weak La Ninas is up towards the northern tier of the United States, especially there. I also look up there too because it's, usually in the form of snow and cold. And it does look like it's going to be a fairly snowy season up in the northern Rockies. So if you like any of those ski areas up there, they look great as soon as that gets going there in the Pacific Northwest. in the Rockies. I think even Colorado and Utah. Now, when we get towards New Mexico, maybe not the best, but, it only takes one or two storms. But it does look like the Northern Rockies is going to have quite the winter as they typically do in a weak La Nina. One of my first winters, in fact, the first winter that I moved up to Montana for my first job out of college, we had 111 inches of snow, and it was a record-breaking winter, and it was a La Nina. So those have strong correlations there with very snowy and cold up there. But let's talk about what's going to happen here. So that's the outlook, and I wanted to put that into some sort of perspective for you when we talk about that winter outlook for December, January, and February, so that when you see these maps going around, you take those and put them into the correct context and perspective. Weak La Ninas, if you watch the previous episode of Too Twisted for TV, the weak La Nina that we are forecasting this year, as National Weather Service retired meteorologist John Lewis said, a lot of very notable and even sometimes historic events occur during weak La Ninas, because it's not, when you have a weak La Nina, there are other factors that can take over and be more dominant in what's going to happen throughout the rest of the winter. And I think that's going to be the case this year. And there's a lot of warm water in the northern Pacific, and supposedly that should create a strong Alaskan ridge. So I'm going to go to the model data, and give me 1 second because I'm solo today. And I'm going to show you what we do to make a forecast. On a daily basis, we use weather models. And one of the ones that I love to use, the site, it's weatherbell.com. So this just looks kind of like a crude map, and it's not something that you would typically show on TV, that's for sure. But from weatherbell.com, and I got a lot of great access here to some wonderful modeling, and especially the AI that I've been following. The European AI has been doing a fairly good job, in my opinion. And let's address all this, first of all, and explain what you're looking at. And the first thing we're going to do is go over the potential for that cold air for the opening weekend of modern gun season for the deer hunters. So let me make sure I got this. We're looking at the surface here. And this is on Tuesday. Let me go a little bit further out into time. So what you see in the black lines, those are isobars, okay? Those are lines of equal surface pressure. And you see there's a low here in North Dakota, a center of a low in the Texas Panhandle. All right, so what you see in the red lines and the blue lines, those are the temperatures at a level in the atmosphere that we refer to as 850 millibars, which is approximately 5,000 feet up. I like to look at that to see where the freezing line is. So that first blue line there that you see that stretches there along the Canadian border back towards the middle Atlantic, that's where it's freezing at that 5,000 foot level, okay? And then anything south of that where you see those red lines, that's where you're seeing, and it's all measured in degrees Celsius. I don't know if you can make out those numbers, but 12, 18, that's degrees Celsius. Where you see the blobs, all right? You see those gray blobs, you see the green, you even see the blue. You see a storm system crashing ashore in the Pacific Northwest. That's the quantitative precipitation over a 6-hour period of time. So that's the total amount of rain or snow. Well, this would be melted snow, so it'd be the liquid over the previous 6 hours. So you have to know what time period you're looking at. And this is what we use Zulu time, UTC, 0Z Friday, which is Thursday evening. Here we are in standard time now, so that's 6 p.m. So this is the time period from noon on Thursday to 6 p.m. on Thursday. So that's how much liquid that you're expecting. So I hope I've made that clear about what you're seeing here on this map, kind of explain what you're looking at. Pay attention to what's going on here along the Canadian border, because there's going to be a couple of frontal boundaries that we deal with. There's one, and that brings in a chance for rain. You see that low in the Great Lakes, and then you see the rain extending from that. Not much here in Arkansas, but that's one frontal boundary. That comes through on Friday, and another front comes through probably late Saturday night into early Sunday morning. This is the one that delivers the very significant push of cold air that will come in Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Temperatures for the first time this season could get down to freezing for many portions of the state, and we'll have another frost if the winds die out. But this is Sunday morning. And you see high pressure here extending along the high plains. You see low pressure here in the Great Lakes. And that's a pressure gradient where you see all these black lines kind of packed together. Very important for the deer hunters is you see the pressure gradient there will produce strong winds. Remember, high pressure, clockwise flow, counterclockwise flow with an area of low pressure. So you're getting a northerly component to the wind, and that area of high pressure is just driving and drilling cold air all the way down to the Gulf Coast in this situation. So this is Sunday, and it appears Monday morning that high is on top of us. Notice you don't have those isobars. The winds die out on Monday. So it's going to be quite breezy on Sunday, then very cold on Monday and Tuesday. Then on the backside of that high, as it moves towards the east, you get a return flow. And then that's what's going to leave us, I think, for quite a long time with above average temperatures. So this cold period does not last long at all. This is Tuesday afternoon. The high is centered in the southeastern United States. You get a return flow, southwesterly winds. And in Arkansas, that's a very warm wind. I think we're going well back into the 70s coming up next week. Very warm temperatures. So that's a very quick blast of cooler air. The other thing that I want to talk about later on in the month before I get to this colder snap after Thanksgiving is that the models have been very insistent that something around the 16th, 17th, or 18th. And every model portrays it differently. This is the Euro AI. I've seen, let me see if I can pull up the European, the operational run. It shows something quite different. And this would be concerning if this were to happen. You have to look here. It's 312 hours away. So take it with a massive grain of salt. But you also have to watch when you have all this warmer air around, all this milder weather in our secondary severe weather season. You got to look for severe weather. So in the middle of the month, 16, 17, 18, that time period, we could see a significant round of rainfall, followed by another round of cooler air. But when do we get the colder air that's going to lock and hold for a while? Well, I'm going to address that in just a little bit, okay? But for now, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to address that. What I've been looking at the models, been very consistent with the fact that we're going to have the threat for some pretty chilly air the very end of November and the beginning of December. We'll see how long that lasts. We'll talk more about that in just a second. All right, we're back for Too Twisted for TV. Now, that time period after Thanksgiving and into the beginning of December that has caught my eye. Now, there have been times in the past where I'll put out some information for the long range, and it's just, the models have been very consistent. I remember this was 2 winters ago, maybe it's last winter, I don't know. But boy, the models are so bullish on a very strong surge of cold air. I mean, it was one of those things where, like, if there was a betting market, I would take I'd bet on the cold air. If there probably is in Vegas, but I would take the cold air in a heartbeat based on everything that I saw. However, it didn't happen. As we got closer and closer, and just before the event, I mean, for a couple of weeks, it showed the cold air is coming, and then all of a sudden things flipped, and it turned out to be a really warm period. So I wanted to make sure you know that before I go into this data here. It's very complex data. I'll try to break it down for you and try to show you understand this. And I've done this before on my Facebook fan page, showing you some of this long range stuff. But again, going to be using Weather Bell, and going to be using the Euro AI. Also using what's called the European weeklies. I wanted to use so badly the European seasonals, hoping they'd be out by today, but they'll probably be out a little bit later on today. And those are just monthly forecasts that go out throughout the rest of the winter and into the spring. All right, so let's go back and let me explain what you're looking at here. I know it just looks like a blob monster of some sort, but there's actually some forecasting here. This is a hemispheric view, okay? So you're looking down on the Earth with the North Pole in the middle. All right, the Arctic right there in the middle. So we're looking at the whole northern hemisphere top down. Over here is let's see if Todd knows his geography. There's Europe over there. You got Africa. You got the United States down there towards the bottom. There's Alaska, Siberia, Russia, China, all that over here. Now that you kind of orient yourself in Arkansas down here towards the bottom, let me explain what you're looking at. and this is what I'm going to use for predominantly in the second part of my presentation. These are anomalies, 500 millibar height anomalies. So basically where you see these blobs of blues and greens, those are troughs. Where you see the oranges and the reds, those are ridges. Okay? Now, to get cold air into Arkansas, what you want to see is a ridge that sticks up from the eastern Pacific all the way up through western Canada and Alaska. And if you get a trough of low pressure in this area that you see right here, you see that off the west coast, you're getting flooded. Remember, the flow here is from the west to the east, all right, around the globe, west to the east in the northern hemisphere. So what ends up happening is that you get a flow off the Pacific. So you have to know your source region and know that you're getting a mild Pacific flow. Plus, with that air going over the mountains, the Rockies, and it downslopes through the plains, whenever it goes down in elevation like that, that warms the air, and it's mild. We're flooded with mild Pacific air. So that's what we've got this week. And what you're looking at is what we have. We're getting mild Pacific air. If you want cold air, you got to change the source region. You got to bring it from the Arctic or, Alaska and those locations. So watch what happens here. The ridge this weekend. You see that? Look at the ridge going up over the western United States. Now, there's a trough offshore here. This is why this is not going to be long-lived, the shot of cold air. But look at this trough across the central and eastern United States. Do you see that? That's the cold air coming for the beginning of next week. This is on Sunday the 9th in the morning. So you got blocking over the top here. You don't have a polar vortex, really. Everything's kind of split up. It's not, you don't have a stable polar vortex at all. So you're getting shots of cold air moving around the globe. That's what we have. It's transient. It's not going to last long. Watch this. So that's Sunday. Watch what happens. There's that trough again, right off the west coast of the United States. You see that? So this is cool because there's the trough still in place here to the northeast there, near southeast of the Hudson Bay. So you're getting a northwesterly wind flow. This is a cool pattern, but not a cold pattern as that cold air lifts. But then it becomes more mild as you get troughing in the western United States. You have a trough here. You're getting Pacific air. You change the source region now. This is great for the ski lovers out in the western United States, over there towards Tahoe. They're going to be getting a ton of snow. Utah and Colorado, all the way up through the northern Rockies, they're going to be getting quite a bit of snow. And that continues. That's the 17th. And this is leading us towards Thanksgiving. You still have that trough in the western United States. And you still have ridging in the eastern United States. This is a mild pattern. So there's no cold really, except for what's happening late this weekend into the following week. All right, so now let's go to the European weeklies that just came out, the newest run last night. And I got to back this way up. Let me back it up just to show you that it's basically showing the same thing right there. So this is the cold coming for this weekend, all right? Now, watch what happens as we go through time, and remember that this is an ensemble. So what we're looking at are a ton of models with slightly different variables averaged out. So further out in time, the models aren't so much in agreement the further out you go. But they have been lately, and that's why I wanted to bring this up and do this on Too Twisted for TV, is the fact that, my goodness, there's quite a bit of agreement. So watch this. Towards the very end of the month, this is the 30th. How many days are in November? 30 days are in, so it's 30 days this month. So this is the last day of November. You see ridging going up through Alaska, all right? And look at this troughing across the eastern United States. That's a pretty strong signal for that big ridge going up where we want it to for cold air. If you like cold air, that's what you want to see. You want to see that ridging over there as opposed to that where you see that troughing. You want to see that ridging taking place. And it even becomes more pronounced during the first week of December, where you have troughing across the central and eastern United States, and you have little systems that may be coming in off the Pacific and digging in to the central and eastern United States. So I think that this is a cold and stormy pattern. Now, that does not mean snow, but it does not mean snow. It could. You're in December. We get snows in December, and sometimes we can get significant ones. Not saying that's what's going to happen, but this is a pretty stormy pattern going into the first week of December. And please remember, too, what I said, that these things evolve, and what looks like a lock this far out may not pan out. That I've been burned before, but I'll go out on a limb and with these forecasts to show you the things that I'm looking at. So you see this huge area of oranges over the polar area, over the North Pole and Greenland. There's blocking over the top. That's what we call blocking. There's a lot of ridging up there. And as long as you have ridging up there, you're going to dislodge the cold air. It's going to come south. Instead, you could have, a blue, this blue showing up here over the polar areas, and that would be a stable polar vortex. And that would mean that all the cold air is bottled up way to the north, and we're just going to get a west to east flow and mild air off the Pacific. That's not the case here. This is much different. This is indicating cold air intrusions, and it just keeps it going through the 10th. I mean, it becomes even more pronounced by the middle of the month, next month, and you get strong troughing and ridging up into Alaska. So that's a pretty cold air signal. Now, I also want to go to 850 millibar temperature anomalies. Now, remember what we talked about with 850 millibars. That's 5,000 feet up. I use this because if you were to use surface temperatures, it only does it in 7-day increments. But I like to use this upper air temperature at 850 millibars to show temperatures and the movement of air, the cold air and the warm air. So just remember that this is in degrees Celsius. These are anomalies, so departures from average. Where you see the greens and you see the blues, that's cold air. Where you see the reds, that's mild air. Watch what happens this weekend, okay? So you're going to get, let me back that up, there. So you get a little cold air intrusion right in there, okay? That moves away. Remember, these are ensembles, so it's an average of all these different computer models, variables. Towards the end of, see, that's just mild. That's the 18th. It's just mild. The west is cold. You see that? Look at all that blue across the western United States. That's on the 22nd. So, the snow lovers out there getting a good dose. Now, things start to change. You see a little piece of cold air comes in. Look at all the above average temperature anomalies up towards the pole. All right? So it's warmer up there compared to average, which is still cold. I mean, it's darn cold up there. It's just above average. That's on the 25th. See this? Here's December 1st, the first week. You get these cold shots coming in. You see these coming out of Western Canada and moving. It looks like the core of the cold is from British Columbia through the Montana, the Dakotas, into the Great Lakes and the Ohio River Valley. But we catch edges of this, and it could be quite active where you have the battle taking place between the milder air and the colder air. This is where you're going to see a storm track, and it could be quite active. But you're seeing something here on December the 8th. Widespread areas across southern Canada and the northern United States, almost down to Arkansas. You're seeing some pretty chilly air at that 5,000 foot level, the temperature anomalies. And for a model to see that 840 hours out and that cold, that gives you a little bit of confidence that it's seeing something. Look, see that? You don't see that too often when you're talking about something that's about a month away. Okay? And it just keeps coming. Look how mild it stays over the polar areas. If you were to see a bunch of blues up here, I mean, that's it. That's game over for a while. For cold air, it's all going to stay bottled up towards the north. But that's not the case. It just keeps coming. Look at that, the northern Rockies. This is showing in the middle of December, there's more pushes of cold air coming out of the Rockies. How far south do they get? It's absolutely impossible to tell this far out. But the trend is our friend if you like cold air. Teleconnective indices. This is the last thing I want to show you with the teleconnective indices. The Arctic Oscillation, the Eastern Pacific Oscillation, and the North Atlantic Oscillations. Those are the ones that I love to follow this time of the year. And this is based off of the model that I was just showing you. What do all these lines mean? Well, this zero line that runs through the middle from left to right, that's neutral. Everything above that is positive. Everything below that is negative. Don't pay so much attention to the blue line. Pay attention to the green line, all right? That's the mean, the ensemble mean. So you see this dip here in the Arctic Oscillation, which just means blocking over the Arctic. I should have prepared some maps to show you what each one of these teleconnective indices means. But anyway, when you get the negative in any of these three teleconnective indices, that typically means cold air for us. Well, do you see this dip here? All right, that dip, that's our cold air coming late this weekend. And then it rises back up towards neutral, and that's, we're getting warmer air. But towards the end, do you see that? It starts to tail off goes negative towards the 20th of the month, all right? Let's look at the Eastern Pacific Oscillation. This is the one that is the ridging up in Alaska. So when it's in its negative phase, that means that ridge is in place and it delivers cold shots. Well, here's the one coming. It's a short cold shot right there. You see the negative EPO there on Sunday right there. Then pay attention to the green line. It goes sharply positive again. So we're mild, but it tries to go back towards the negative, all right? You're starting to see all these line up. Here's the North Atlantic Oscillation going negative. And like its counterpart, the Arctic Oscillation, it goes up towards neutral to a little positive and then starts to tail off towards the end of the month into the negative. So I hope that that's made some sense to you about some of the things that we look at when we're doing some long-range forecasting. And to be honest with you, I'll just go right ahead and tell you, I'm not an expert in long-range forecasting. And we primarily deal with 10-day outlooks, what's going to happen tomorrow and for the next 10 days. So when I'm talking about seasonal forecasting, 30, 60, or 90 days, I'm going to tell you that even for the best forecasters, it's a very difficult task. You've heard of the butterfly effect, where a butterfly flaps its wings in Asia and it changes the wind pattern around the entire globe. I mean, there's so many different things that can change the upper air pattern and have big influences and ripple effects all the way around the planet. So those are the things. Again, the trend is our friend. If you like, a chilly holiday season, I'm not talking at this point in time about some huge Arctic outbreak. No, but what I am seeing is the fact that we could see below average temperatures, and that would be saying a lot, because if we get a period, an extended period of below average temperatures in late this month and into December, we haven't had a month of below average temperatures. The last one that I can remember was last January. For the past 2 or 3 years, we've had very much above average temperatures for the past couple of years, at least every month. So if you get a month of below average temperatures, that's a big deal in the face of what we've had recently over the past few years. With the last below average temperature was last January, and you remember we had that Arctic air and we had that cold. So that's what we're looking at. And I want to, as always, thank you for trusting KARK and the Arkansas Storm Team, and thank you for watching this edition of Too Twisted for TV.